one of the really pressing questions is what you can do, you know, on the 24th of January, what you can do on that day and that week getting back to school. And here I'm going to say something which is extremely helpful. What I want you to do is what you do well. I want you to be a good teacher, a good receptionist, a good administrative officer, a good teaching aide, because doing your job normally is what children expect, and it very quickly gets kids back into the routine that this is school and this is predictable and this is actually what happens. What happens at school is I turn up, I put my bag on my peg, I go into my classroom, it's the first day of school, so I find out where I'm sitting, and then the bell goes and we start doing school stuff. And so really I actually don't want you emotionally to do anything different. I want you to do well what you already do well, and that's to be educational staff. This will contain children. This will remind them that life goes on. It will remind them why they're there at school and what they have to do. Now, there are a little bit of sort of nuance which you have to think about. So, for instance, you will have the decision of whether an anxious child is anxious because it's their first day of school or whether it's anxious because of a flood-related phenomena. Now, that can be quite difficult. What you kind of need to do really is you need to think, if it's a child that's been at school before, is remember what they've been like every other first day of every other term and every other year. If this child's tradition is to have some separation anxiety, then they will have separation anxiety again, and it might be a little bit worse than before, because they will be worried about their parents and worried about what's going on. If this child is incredibly robust and has never had anxiety before, but is extremely clingy this time for the first time, then actually that might be flood related. I don't think you should do anything. I think you should file that away and see how that goes over the next couple of days. But clearly if that persists, then that might be a flood related scenario. Now, another thing you might be confronted with is some children will need to talk about this event. A, because it's incredibly newsworthy, but B, is that part of there's something, an interesting phenomenon called repetition compulsion. It's like a moth and a light. The moth keeps flying close to the light, even though it's a bit dangerous for them. Some children will want to talk about this. Now, my advice is to kind of put some sort of punctuation around that. So, for instance, you might allow 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon for everyone to share a little bit of their flood story. But you have to contain that, because if it gets too much, it'll develop a life of its own, and it'll take control of the class, and you'll go to the level of the most traumatised child. And then people might get very distressed and might be tearful and whatnot. So I would put some punctuation around that. We're going to talk about the floods, but we're only going to talk about it for 20 minutes and that's it. Or 10 minutes and that's it. Or even more controlling about it, we're going to draw a picture of it. It's very hard to get contagious, contaminated grief if everyone's sitting there drawing a picture. Okay, so just be a little bit thoughtful. You can't stop it completely because it's a little bit unstoppable. Okay, and you want to have a little bit of control. You don't want it to all happen at lunchtime in the playground. But clearly you don't want to let it overwhelm you and the class, because that's unhealthy.